Well, I'm Chris Molyneux, and I'm the manager stroke director of Molyneux Kale Company, and we're basically up in the northwest of England and we grow kale. That's our big thing. All different types of kale, everything you've heard of and a lot you haven't heard of, and also branched out into things like chicory and chard and a whole range of other things, just to be, something different. I don't like to be, I get bored with the boring things. I like to do different things, and actually with the kale job it's really good. It's gone very well, and we do, obviously Cavallo's doing really well as well, so it's been good, so up in it, and it's sort of like kale seems to like our sort of weather, sort of like a lot of rain and not too warm, but today's unusual. We're looking to grow those in a rotation, and what we really want to do is, obviously we're working the ground hard when we're growing those crops, so we want to give the land a break afterwards. So rather than growing cereals, we usually put into a cover crop. So either you'll go in a cover crop straight in, you do 2 years kale and then straight into a cover crop, probably 3 years in a cover crop, and probably that'll be sort of like a grass clover mix with some chicory or some other several species in, sort of thing that Cotswold Seeds do really well at, and then we try and do that. Then if we've just got a break for a short period of time, we'll then look to probably put in just a short-term cover crop, which and I sort of change these things around a bit, because what I want to do is because we're growing brassicas, a lot of brassicas, we don't want a brassica in the mix, so we've actually generated a mix without a brassica, which is what one we've got here, which is at the summer quick fix, which actually could turn into an autumn and over winter and next year crop, because I've lifted the red clover in it a bit more than they normally have, because that allows to, if it dies down and I don't decide not to crop it this year, or maybe not even beginning next year, but later on, then I'll get a green cover will come back in the spring. So it gives us the options, makes it flexible, and as you can see, it's just amazing now. It's just coming into flower nicely. This ground was really mauled hard, getting the winter crops off, and it struggled a bit. So basically it's just great for this thing, and we're going to leave this in over winter, I think, looking at it now, and see what happens for next year, because probably next year we might crop this sort of like May, June, July time, and then we'll have built up fertility there over the summer, this summer and then the winter, and we're looking at probably, I don't know, I've measured it, you've got 100-150 kilo of nitrogen available, as well as all the good things that's going on underneath, I mean, once you've left this down for 18 months, you need to dig this up, and there's worms galore, and you've got the movement in the soil. You've got you can just pick the wormholes out. You dig it down. It just makes such a difference. And well, we might even try going into strip tilling this now. So we'll go in and strip till it and then plant in straight into it. And because you've got the worms developed and the soil living and going, strip tilling works really well, and the whole thing just takes off, and you don't need to work the whole soil profile to actually get a decent crop. You only need to work what you need to do just to get the plant to take, and then nature does the rest, as it were. Well, we're farming on about 500 acres altogether, and we've been, obviously I set up on my own doing kale. I used to work with the family before this. I set up my own in 2013, and before that I was working with the family, and I've been here for 30 odd years, and the family's been farming for sort of like centuries. I think we go back at least 1850 anyway, and so we've been around a while on the fertile West Lancashire plain, let's call it. Sometimes we feel it isn't so fertile when it's absolutely it's soaked or it's frozen or it's this or it's that, but generally really good soils. The good thing about our soils is that they are quite naturally high in organic matter, quite a black soil, which is quite unusual. It's sandy loam really, mostly. There is bits of loam in it, and there's a bit of clay in it too, in just patches too, so it's quite variable. You get sort of like really sandy bits when you do your soil sample, because I've got a decent soil sample going down to 60 centimetres, which takes a bit of pushing in when you've actually on a non-rejuvenated soil. But once you've got a rejuvenated soil, it goes in so much easier. And when you pull it down, you go down 60 centimetres, you can find it's quite good, because it tells you what's actually in your soil, what your soil profile is like over the field, because you'll be wandering around soil sampling and you can think, oh, this is a sandy loam, sandy field. But actually when you go around, you find there is some loamy bits in it, or sandy loam bits, and the reason why is because you've got some clay there underneath, so subsoil is clay, but you wouldn't necessarily notice that, you wouldn't even spot it when you're ploughing it. But if you get in there and do, you know, it's quite useful actually. It's 60 centimetre auger sort of thing, and you just push that down in, and if it's best to do when it's damper rather than drier, because it doesn't work otherwise. But if you do that, then it works, and it's great for just finding what's going on, because you can actually see differences in your soil types. We grow a whole range of kales. So we've got the green kale, standard green kale, red kale, Cavolo Nero, and we've got and then we have all the weird kales, which is sort of like, we have the coloured ones. So we have the variegated kales, which sort of like flowers, and they're great because just that colour just stands out. And then we also have which ones? Oh, there's also the red Russian kales, and they're actually not proper kales because they're actually they're actually kale. We're called kale, but actually different species. They're Brassica napus, so it's slightly different. So all the ones we call kale normally are Brassica oleracea, but these are Brassica napus. But anyway, we grow those, and the Siberian ones, we've been selecting those ourselves. So that's the other little thing that we do. It's a bit different because we grow all these different types of kales, and then we actually select our own. So we have our own varieties of Cavolo now that we're breeding, and we have our own selections of kale, several different types selections of kale, our own selection of red kale, and we're actually working on selections of these Russian kales, as I call them, for just different things that I want to do with the crop. Basically, I want to extend the season on the crop in the UK, and that's what we do with especially we started off with the green kale because we'd extend the season. Because what happened was we grow our own spring cabbage variety as well, so we grow spring cabbage as well. But the thing is, we keep the seed from that. That's a historical thing, goes back right through the family. I had it for probably 150 years, something like that, at least. And anyway, what happened was we were growing this kale, and we started growing kale as well as the cabbage, and we were keeping the seeds from the cabbage, and we found some kale in the cabbage. I thought, well, let's put that together and see whether we can see what happens, thinking maybe something will do good. Anyway, the great thing about it is it doesn't bolt in the spring. So most kales, you get to the end of March, and it starts to look like an oilseed rape field. So you have to then go to Spain for your kale. But what we do is we just sort of like, hang on a minute, we can use our variety. We stick our variety in that period, and then from sort of like early April to mid June, end of June, we use our variety, and that covers the gap. Our market's mostly wholesale and going to food services. That's what we tend to work for, and so to restaurants and stuff like that, chefs, that sort of thing. We also do to farm shops and stuff like that, but generally just to work. And then we have one supermarket we supply direct, and that's Booths, because they're in the north of England. They like local produce, and it sort of fits, good fit for us. Basically, obviously this was quietly a winter harvested crop came off here. It was quite badly, a very wet winter, so it was quite rough, the field, when we finished it. So we let it dry out, and then we basically just dissed it level. And then really all we did was dist it level, went straight in and sowed it with the cover crop. We didn't bother subsoiling or anything like that, because the idea is to let the cover crop do the work for us, because obviously it was still quite damp underneath, so you didn't really want to disturb it underneath. So we just went straight in and got the cover crop established, which established quite nicely on it. And then but then obviously we had a really wet May, so it really struggled through May. So it would normally be a bit taller than this by now, but I think it's just taking a bit of time to get going. Then we had a really dry June, so that really slowed it down again. But then we've had all the rain since the beginning of July, and then the temperature, and it's just going off now. So this will get put probably another couple of feet on by the time you get into the autumn. And it's great because I can just leave this now. I was thinking about topping it, because obviously you can see in the distance there's a little bit of weed coming in, but my view was that it would just come into flower and there's just bees all over it like a rash. So I thought, well, do you know what? I'm just going to leave the bees on it, and we'll have to live with the fact we've got a few weeds in there. But they're not going to be too much of a problem, because this is going to take the weeds out slowly anyway, because it keeps going, it keeps growing, it just goes above the weeds and just outcompetes them. And then basically we'll just leave this in. I was thinking of cropping this in sort of any time, probably taking it end of June, end of July, beginning of August, we'd be planting a late kale crop in, but I've decided not to bother on this ground because I think it needs a bit longer leaving, and I think what we'll do is, because you can see it just needs to structure up a bit more, so I'm just going to leave the cover crop into the autumn, and then it'll just grow through the autumn, and I'll put even more height on, look incredible. Then when your frosts come, any of the frost susceptible clovers in the mix will actually be killed out, and then what will happen, it'll die back and just lie as a sort of like a nice mulch on the surface to protect the soil. And you'll see there'll be the odd red clover in there, and then that red clover will take over in the spring again, and then basically that'll give us a good entry then to go in probably in May time. And we're going to try this year, maybe on this field, go in with a strip till machine and then plant straight into it. Within our rotation, we tend to have probably it's 50% in cover crop, 50% in kale or other veg crops. And mostly kale, because that's what we tend to grow. I mean, obviously we do grow some chard, but it's not the same volume. And so it's about 50-50, so how it works. And I mean, general rotation is, it'll be sort of 2 years kale, and then 2 years cover crop, and then 2 years kale, 2 years cover crop. Now I might intersperse that on the smaller. We might put I might swap with somebody for they'll put leeks on or something, or they'll put potatoes on. It's not ideal because it's not great for soil, but it does give a break in terms of your different cropping, which is probably good for But it's a bit of a grey area, that one, because the problem with it is it's quite good if you're doing 2 kales and then a 2 year break and then 2 kales, because you get the soil does benefit from that. Well, basically I'm just looking at what I want to do, and then I'll have a discussion with Cotswold Seeds about what I would want, what I wanted to do, and then I'll come up with options to put in. Now we might have a discussion then, because I'll say, well, do you know what, I don't really want to do that because of other things, and then we'll just come to a compromise as to what we're going to do. And then we get the mix sent, and off we go. A couple of days later, usually. Well, what I'm finding is I'm getting better permeability. I've seen it particularly one field, which is slightly heavier soil, so it's got a little bit more. It's not what I call a heavy field. We don't have heavy hills here, but it's got a slightly higher clay content. So, and you tend to find that with the amount of rainfall we get, it can struggle sometimes. But we've just improved permeability, and I'm sure that's sort of a case of you've got more wormholes, you've got more biomass, the soil's more alive. That's basically it, and that gives the improvement and gives you a better quality crop at the end of the day, especially going into the autumn winter production periods, because obviously it just holds better. And then and we're finding it in the spring cropping as well. Our own variety in the spring, it does better on after these sorts of crops, really comes into its own and holds better and holds its quality and its colour better than it would normally do. I've been using Cotswold Seeds for about 10 years, I think, at least 10 years, probably more actually. And I was always drawn to them because they always had a good selection of different types of, and I was really passionate about clovers right from when I started thinking about this. So it's probably more like 20 years actually, because time's slipping, isn't it? But I've been passionate about clovers and had a range of clovers and different ones to try, and I tried a few different ones, and then they came up with the mixes, and that was really good as well, because then you could really put them all together and just let it go, and they're flexible in their approach, because you can say, well look, I don't want this, I want that, I want the other, and they'll make a mix up for you that'll do the job, and they know the varieties that'll pick, that'll work with together, so yeah, so that's why I use them. It's great.